Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to the Chicken Box. Today is Thursday, November 16th. Can you believe it that a week from today will be Thanksgiving? And while I'm talking about Thanksgiving, we will not be on the box, not on this box, and we'll be on a turkey box, some of us next week. So we will not be on a box next week, but we're glad that you're here this week. I am Frances Tony Draper, a CEO and publisher. I call myself the chief storyteller for the Afro-American newspapers, is what we were named when we were first started. We just go by Afro News, and we're glad that you're here. We've been around a long time, since 1892, and that's great for history. But this is 2023, and while we really appreciate our history, we appreciate our founders. We have a lot of things that we've covered over the years. We really today are excited about today and about what we're doing today and how we tie it all together. And so Impeccable is traveling. So for those of you who watch us regularly, you know that the Chicken Box, first of all, let me back up. A Chicken Box, we are based in Baltimore. And so a Chicken Box is 4 wings and fries in a greasy little box that we have over here in Baltimore. I know you may have it in other places, that people go into the store, and when they ask for a chicken box, that's what they get. Now there's some debate about whether it is salt, pepper, hot sauce, and ketchup. That's your preference. And we spell chicken box for the show's purposes with box with 2 X's, with our theme of don't be a chicken, get on the box. We talk about a variety of topics. We're powered by the Afro, so go to afro.com. Impeccable is one of our co-hosts. It's an intergenerational show with a Gen Z, or usually a millennial, a Gen Xer, a baby boomer. Our Gen Zer is not feeling well today, and so we're going to give a shout out to Ashley. We hope that she feels better. Impeccable is traveling today. He's out of the country, and so safe travels to Impeccable. But you're here today, and I'm here today, and we've got a fascinating discussion that we're going to have today. And so I asked our producer, she's going to pop on. I asked our producer, you all don't see her usually. She's here every week on the Chicken Box, but she's usually in the background helping us to keep this stream moving. And so I asked Taryn to jump on today as the producer so that we would also have a second voice. And Taryn, are you Gen Z? Are you
millennial? I'm
okay,
a millennial.
So we get a millennial on. And in addition to Taryn, I'm most excited about the fact that we also have a very, very, very special guest today. And so Taryn's going to tell us what topic we're talking about today. And we're going to bring our special guest on.
Absolutely.
And I will introduce our guest after Taryn tells us what the topic is. And then we're going to jump into the discussion. Please share this. Please like this. Let people know that today, drum roll, please, Taryn, we are talking about
neurodivergence, and specifically dyslexia. Neurodivergence is a topic that's close to my heart. I have ADHD. My stepson has autism. My daughter has ADHD. So our family is full of neurodivergence. It is something that can be a little bit taboo to talk about, not only in just society in general, but specifically mental health has, different implications in the Black community. So we are so excited to have Ms. Winifred Winston on today, and I'll throw it back to you, Dr. Draper, to introduce her. Okay.
Bring her on. Let's introduce her. Hey, Winifred.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us. We are excited to have you on to talk about neurodivergence and what that means, and dyslexia. A lot of us are familiar with that term, but I don't know we all know what that means. And so we're excited about that. But let me do a little introduction of you. Please add in. Winifred and I were talking backstage. Both of us have, what did you call them, Winifred? Old
names.
Yes. We have old names that we had to grow into. They weren't cool and young like a Taryn. She's Winifred I was a Francis, but my father had the wisdom to give me a second name, right? So Tony is what I was called. But I put Francis there because that is actually my name. But Winifred has so much experience. She's an HR professional, a career administrator in K through 12 and higher education, public school districts as an administrator, special education school. And so when we start talking about neurodivergence and we talk about dyslexia and everything else that goes along with this, she's going to speak from a lot of perspectives. One as a professional, and then as a mom with a daughter who had special education as part of her portfolio, her education, and what that means from a parent's perspective, and the fact that we really don't have a lot of information. And so she founded Dyslexia Association, a 501c3 charitable organization, so that parents who are struggling with how to best help their children would have some tools, right? And she hosts a podcast. I'm going to find out all about that, called Black and Dyslexic. And so we're going to find out about that podcast as well. And so she's got so much knowledge. Winfred, I almost don't know where to start. You've got so much to offer and today. So can you tell us a little bit about why and how and when you got into this work? What prompted you to do what you're doing?
Sure, sure. So I started as a career service professional working in higher education. That was just my passion. I felt like when you help someone find a career, it's life-changing, right? Not just a job, but a career. And I was a non-traditional undergrad student and kind of got my career started a little late. And so I was working in higher ed and students wouldn't come to the career center. And I had a bachelor's degree. Let me just say that I was in higher education, but I only had a bachelor's degree, right? And I'm thinking students aren't coming here. They love their professors. I loved my professors. Oh, now I have to get a master's because I'll teach and then they'll come to me. And so I started teaching career research and development courses in higher education. And then I worked for one of the largest employers here in Baltimore City to help city residents find entry-level positions, right? And then I was a high school teacher. So I was a high school teacher after working in higher ed. And all of that comes together around the time when my daughter starts going to school. And she's 3, massive vocabulary, using the word defecate, inquisitive, asked tons of questions. But I noticed when she left daycare, she wasn't reading like the other children. And I'm like, well, I don't want to compare her to others. She's my only child. And then we get the identification of SLD, specific learning disability. What's that? What is SLD? And as a former educator, and I worked at North Avenue here in Baltimore City headquarters, I knew people. I could call somebody, hey, principal friend, hey, special education friend, special educator, can you look at this? What's going on here? And I felt helpless. But then I also realized, wait a minute, when I was an adjunct at Sojourner Douglas, I saw some issues with the writing. Now I'm having folks write LinkedIn profiles, write cover letters. I'm like, wait a minute, when I interviewed all those candidates for that large employer, I knew they could do the work. I knew we could hire them, but they weren't successful on the assessment, right? The 100 question assessment. Then I started thinking back to my high school students. I'm like, wow, I was a high school teacher and I didn't recognize that some of my kiddos were struggling. So it all came full circle for me. And what I realized is that Black and underrepresented minorities lacked access to information and instructional strategies, right? Around learning differences, around SLD. What is SLD? Well, that's the category that dyslexia falls under IDEA. And so that's what prompted me to fund the nonprofit, but more so, and all of that, when we got the identification, and then I just panicked. I'm like, okay, the school can't help her. I'm going to get an independent educational evaluation. I didn't know. I just said independent educational evaluation. I didn't know what that was. I kept asking, well, how do I get her identified? Because the school said, we don't identify dyslexia. I'm sorry, we don't diagnose We got to use my words correctly here. We don't diagnose dyslexia, but they can identify characteristics of, right? And they can mark SLD on the IEP and also dyslexia. But none of this stuff I knew at the time. And
Okay, so Winifred, let me ask you a question real quick, and I want you to finish, because there may be some people who are watching who say, "Ooh, IEP, what's an IEP, and what's that?"
Yep.
And is that across districts, because we have people watching from all over the country usually.
Absolutely. So yes.
Okay, so IED is a
IEP. That's an individual.
IEP. Look,
Yes.
that's an IED. I know it's IEP.
That's an individual education plan. So
Okay.
because I knew that my daughter was a struggling reader, I let the school know. We had transferred in from a small private school, and we were now in public school. And I said, "Oh, I have concerns about her reading. I don't think it's where it needs to be." And so they were giving her additional supports, response to intervention. They were letting her know that they were going to call her first on the carpet, and the former reading specialist at the time was working with her individually. And this was first grade.
When you say call her on the carpet, you meant invite her to come and sit on the.
No, she's in first grade, so they're sitting around on the carpet, and
that's what I mean.
Yes,
okay.
Yes, they're in this little circle and they're doing reading time.
Okay.
And I saw some improvement, but I knew something was off because I knew my daughter was smart. Not just saying that, but I knew she was bright. She asked so many questions. Her vocabulary was out of this world, but she wasn't trying to read. So I was open to finding out what was wrong, right? And so in order to be eligible for an IEP, you have to have an evaluation. I wanted her assessed. I wanted an assessment done. So I told the school at the end of first grade, yeah, I see a little improvement, but I don't really know what's going on. So let's do the evaluation, right? And so the school evaluated her and they determined that she was eligible for an IEP, individual education plan, and her primary diagnosis was SLD, specific learning disability, because the IDA, there's about 13 codes. I might be saying that wrong, but there are codes under IDEA, and 09 SLD is where dyslexia falls under, right? For example, if a kiddo primary diagnosis is ADHD, it would be other health impairment, OHI.
Got it.
I'm being very specific here because as a parent, when you advocate for your child, you need to know what that primary diagnosis is, right? So when we got that identification, I had my first meeting with the school. I left there and I felt like, oh my gosh, they're lying to me. They're not telling me everything. I don't understand. And in everything, all my experience, when I'm around that table with about 5 or 6 folks from the school district, and we're talking about the struggles of my daughter, I am not my best self. Sometimes I'm zoning out because I'm getting emotional. Now, the role that I had as an employee with the school district, I had to have hard conversations with principals because I worked in staffing, right? So I wasn't as intimidated to have books and papers in front of me. And I wasn't as intimidated to say, no, I don't agree with that or explain that further, because of the role I previously had. And I was very good at reading body language, right? Because I would have to go in and tell principals, you got to surplus this good science teacher, but you can't write this custodian that you're not using out of your budget. That's a very hard conversation, right? So I had that privilege, right, going into the meeting like that. But when I left, I was in my car crying. And I called my cousin, who is an attorney, because I felt like, I don't know, I was saying yes, but I really didn't understand what was going on. So I just said, I'm going to get her evaluated myself, and I'm going to get her in this program. And within 3 days, I was told I needed $22,000 to help her learn to read.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, you said so many key things. I'm going to stop you for a minute. The first thing that you said was, you said a lot of things, but parents just don't know, what to expect. You go into, now you help me, Taryn. It sounds like you've been into one of those IEP meetings. You go into an IEP meeting, you have a table full of professionals, right, who know what they're talking about because they do this every day, probably all day. They've got their books and papers and forms and things there. You had a little bit of an advantage because you came out of higher education, high school teacher, worked for the school district. So you knew some of what this process was and had a little bit of an advantage. Yet intimidating, sounds like an intimidating, overwhelming. Are they telling me the truth? Is this best for my daughter? And my alternative is thousands,
Mhm.
thousands. Did I get that right?
Well, yes, thousands of dollars because I did not know,
Because you
right?
did not know. Okay.
Yes, and the thousands of dollars came into an independent educational evaluation. I did not need that because they identified her with SLD, but they wouldn't say the word dyslexia,
Ah,
right?
okay.
Someone at the end of the IEP meeting made a mistake and said, well, because I kept asking, right? With the IEP, it's set up with accommodations and interventions, right? So an accommodation, for example, is more time on a test, right? So let's say my daughter is dyslexic. She needs more time because she's a slow reader, right?
Right.
But what is the intervention that's going to teach her how to read, right? So I kept saying, okay, more time. And, I didn't know how to ask the question, but I knew that they weren't telling me how they were going to teach her how to read. They weren't providing the intervention, right? But I didn't even know to even say there's accommodations and interventions because I didn't know that much. Yes, I was an educator. I had a binder full of IEPs for my students that I was supposed to implement in the classroom, but I'm sitting around here with the principal, the IEP chair, the special educator, around the table with the psychologists, these professionals, but I didn't understand the IEP process. So when they identified her with SLD, that was the identification of dyslexia. So when that person at the very end slipped up and said, oh, well, when students have dyslexia, we usually have dyslexia. Oh, no, I didn't say that. And then I said, well, how do I get her identified? What do I do? Oh, well, it was all this stuttering and, and so when I left, that's why I felt like, well, were they lying to me? Were they telling me everything? And that's why I said, well, I'm gonna do it on my own. I'm gonna figure it out on my own. And that's where that $22,000 price tag came in from private tutoring and then an independent educational evaluation, right?
Which you didn't need.
Didn't need because I already had the identification.
Right.
So my cousin talked me off the ledge. She's an attorney and she did some special education law. And I started researching, well, how do I find out? And I called my pediatrician crying. And I said, I don't have $22,000. What do I do? And she says, here's this psychologist. I want you to call her, let her know that I referred you. And Dr. Janice Lepore talked to me for 45 minutes and told me what to do. She told me what books to read. She told me to go visit special education schools, see what they're doing. I said, they have those? We have those in Baltimore? Lo and behold, I passed one. One is walking distance to North Avenue. She told me what websites to go to. And because of the job I had at the time, I had autonomy to build my own schedule, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I had autonomy to say, hey, Tony, we're going to go to a lunch and learn. You lunch and learn. You telling me your daughter has an IEP. I put a lunch and learn on your calendar. And you're like, okay, Winifred. And I'm like, come on, let's get in my car. And I just take you to the lunch and learn, but it's Maryland nonprofits or disability rights, rather, doing a IEP workshop on how to advocate for your child. So I want to put that in there. I had that autonomy in the job that I had that I could go put that on my calendar. I'm not punching the clock. I'm not an hourly employee. You know what I mean? Like I had autonomy with my schedule to do these things. So I started educating myself and I found a grassroots organization called Decoding Dyslexia. And it was full of parent advocates. And I would go to the meetings and not understand a darn thing that was going on. But I said, okay, these women are parents too, and they know how to help their kiddos. Okay, who seems nice? All right, well, who can I ask a question to? And one of them said, hey, we can meet and go over the IEP because I really have a handle on it now. I said, we can meet. You'll meet with me. And so I started doing that. But I wasn't afraid to say I didn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And most often, all of the parents were white, and I was the only Black parent. I wasn't uncomfortable because I attended both PWIs for undergrad and graduate. My first 2 jobs out of college, I was the only Black person in a white space, right? I was the only Black person in my jobs. Okay. And I've had instances where I have been called a banana girl. Um, oh, don't ask her about Katrina and what happened over there and with all the Black people. She gonna get mad, right? So I had these experiences. So I showed up in a space where I was the only one. And then I started learning how to advocate. I started learning that every parent should have an advocate at the IEP meeting. That IEP is a legally binding document. I did not realize that. There are timelines, there are certain things that the school must do and must adhere by, or you can say,
So,
okay, you're not doing what you're supposed to do.
okay, so let's back up. Let's and Taryn is on Taryn, I don't know the race of your child, by the way, but and you've had some experience with this. Winifred's pointing out, which accurately, that some of the experiences are different based on race.
My experience was also incredibly different because my daughter was diagnosed outside, like it wasn't her school saying, hey, she has, a learning disability or anything like that. We noticed it at home. ADHD is so much easier to diagnose than dyslexia because it's not like you have to learn how to read. It's just, ooh, a squirrel, like not really, but there's a lot more.
What's different? I don't
in
know.
your day-to-day life. So, with dyslexia, you might notice that someone is dyslexic because like Winifred said, the reading capabilities aren't as well. They're not interested in school as much because it's just difficult for them and they don't understand it. They can't read. There's also number dyslexia.
That's dyscalculia. Yeah, that's
go.
a learning disability in math. And the thing too is that most folks who have dyslexia have average to above average intelligence, right?
Yep.
Had I kept my daughter in school, in public school, had I not been advocating from the time we got in, my daughter is very compliant. My daughter is a A student. She wants to do well, even in kindergarten, like she just loves school. She would have been overlooked because when you have a conversation with her, when you talk to her, you know she's smart. So a lot of educators that don't know about dyslexia will say, apply yourself, try harder. You're not focusing. And here's the hiccup with ADHD. My daughter is dyslexic and ADHD, right? And as a Black mom, I said, oh, she doesn't have ADHD. Her birthday's 5 days after mine. That's a medical code. And they just want insurance to pay for it. Because in my mind, I shared you guys that I grew up in the 80s in Brooklyn, New York during the crack epidemic. A lot of children born addicted to drugs were diagnosed with ADHD. So in my mind, that's all I had about ADHD. I'm like, oh, my daughter's not ADHD. Lo and behold, I'm ADHD. I'm the most ADHD person there is, undiagnosed, right? So most kiddos who get identified with ADHD who also have dyslexia, it is harder for them to get the interventions because the school will say if they focus and pay attention, then they'll learn to read. And that's not the case. And ADHD is more than just not focusing. We can focus. We have trouble deciding on what to focus on. We can actually hyper focus, right? And ADHD shows up differently for boys, for girls. It is not just hyperactivity. It is inattentiveness. And then you can have a combination of both. So
it's also much more difficult for girls and women to get diagnosed with ADHD than boys. There's a much different curve on that. Girls can hide it better. We're better in social situations. So we can mask and we can pretend that, everything's fine. We know what's going on. And lo and behold, it's all.
My daughter, the school didn't identify her with ADHD. When we went and we did go and get the independent educational evaluation. They picked up on the ADHD. So she's dyslexic and ADHD. And I still didn't believe it for like the first year. I'm like, her birthday's 5 days after mine. And as I started advocating, Dr. Janice Lepore, we were out having brunch, because now I'm starting to know people in the space. Let's have brunch and talk about this redacted evaluation here, right? And she says to me, well, sometimes when the parent exhibit those same behaviors, they don't really pick up on different things that they see, because when we have those evaluations, the teachers score your child and then you score your child. So my answers were very different than the teachers, right? So when she said this to me casually, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm driving. I said, well, wait a minute. She said, when the parents, oh, she's trying to say I'm ADHD, whatever. So then one of my coworkers said that she told me when I walked in to work with her, she was like, oh yeah, I said one day, oh yeah, she's ADHD just like me. She's all over the place. And she said, yeah, Winifred, go take one of those online assessments. Still kind of like over my head, right? Because I'm thinking something else about ADHD. So finally, my daughter is identified. I'm at my doctor and I say, yeah, my daughter's dyslexic. Her dad's dyslexic because it is hereditary. He went undiagnosed, did not realize he was dyslexic until she got identified, right? And then I said, oh, she gets it from him. And my primary says, well, Winifred, I diagnosed you 10 years ago when you were in graduate school. I said, what? She said, yeah, you're ADHD, so she must get that from you. I said, I am? She said, yeah, I gave you medicine. I said, you did? I said, I remember taking medicine. She said, well, what you thought it was for? I said, I don't know. I thought it was the hookup. I thought you was trying to get me through graduate school.
I'm sorry, Winifred. I didn't mean to laugh, but okay.
No, I laughed because literally I did not sit with my diagnosis of ADHD until the pandemic when I lost my job. And I
Wow.
start really assessing myself. But with my daughter in second and third grade, I started saying, wait a minute, she is ADHD. And then I started seeing myself in her. Right. A lot of times people would say, because I'm from New York, I have thick skin, I'm very direct. That's that New York in her. No, I'm ADHD and I'm impulsive. And sometimes I say the first thing that comes out of my mouth. Right.
So help us, Taryn, Winifred. I think it'll help our listeners too. By the way, if you are just our viewers, if you are just tuning in, this is the Chicken Box powered by the Afro, Maryland's oldest Black business, been around since 1892, and we're having a fascinating discussion with Winifred Winston, the founder of the Dyslexic Association. I probably said it wrong, and our producer Taryn, who's hopping on for the first time on the box or second time on the box. Our co-host Ashley is out, and Impeccable is traveling as well. And so we're here today talking about really some learning disabilities. There are lots of learning disabilities, but we're talking about specifically two of them, both dyslexia and ADHD, that impact both of these ladies, probably impacts all of us. So I'm going to dial it back a little bit, Winifred. So I want to make sure all of our viewers come on and weigh in. We want your questions. We want to know that you're with us. Taryn's going to check the chat. Taryn, if we have anybody with us who's just signed on, let me know, put it in our chat so I can give them a shout out today. What if somebody said to you, Winifred, just give me a basic definition of dyslexia, or a basic definition. There may not be such a thing as a basic one, because people say ADHD and then they'll say, okay, it's just ADD without the hyperactivity, or it's this, it's that. What's the most recent? Because these things change as well. Mm-hmm. They change, they evolve over time, either because we have more information or we just stop labeling it the same way. But what is dyslexia?
So dyslexia is a language-based learning disability that's neurological, that impacts the ability to read, write, and spell. The brain has trouble processing speech sounds and connecting them to symbols and letters, right? That's the problem. So it impacts their ability to decode, which is break apart words and put them together, right? So someone who has dyslexia will have trouble sounding out words because they don't recognize the sound. I've never been tested. I know that I'm ADHD, but I could potentially be mildly dyslexic because I remember clearly I don't know how to spell. I'd never learned how to spell. I was always fascinated when people could sound out a word and spell it. I'm like, wow, boo, 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 it makes a word. Like you know those sounds. And I was always doing very well in school. I was always in advanced classes, honors classes, so I wouldn't have gotten caught. It's really hard. This is another topic. I don't want to go. That's my ADHD. I'm going to say 2E, but we're not going to go there. We're going to stick to dyslexia. So dyslexia is a language-based learning disability that impacts the ability to read, write, and spell. And they have trouble connecting the sound, the speech, to the letter, the symbol, right? And I would say ADHD, so ADHD encompasses everything. In the past, they used to say ADD, attention deficit disorder, and they broke it up. But ADHD now covers everything, and you can have it ADHD hyperactivity, ADHD inattentive, and then ADHD combined. And I hate teacher talk, and I hate all that research talk. So I would say it's an emotional. It's ADHD is when you have trouble regulating the emotions in the brain. Um, that's a good way because folks who have ADHD are impulsive. This is one thing that I never knew. Folks who have ADHD have a deficiency of melatonin in the brain, right? I always thought I had insomnia. For years, I sleep with a notepad and pen on my nightstand because at night something comes to me and I write it down. That's my ADHD. And it didn't occur to me until my daughter told her pediatrician, my brain won't shut off at night, right? My brain won't shut off at night. That was the ADHD, right? So you have trouble calming all those different things you're thinking about and being centered. So meditation and mindfulness really helps to clear the head, clear your head out, right? And so in our community, we just don't talk about learning differences, and we don't want another label, right? I had a parent tell me, I don't want another label, but in K-12, we have to get those labels in order to get the help, right? We have to get the labels in order to get that robust IEP, right? So we just don't talk about learning disabilities. And I started on Instagram. My handle is So All Can Read, but I had a hashtag Black and Dyslexic. And I started highlighting folks who were Black that had dyslexia that most folks didn't know. Usher Raymond is dyslexic. Octavia Spencer. We often hear about Whoopi Goldberg, Danny Glover. Can you imagine Whoopi Goldberg, Danny Glover reading all of that script and content for The Color Purple? And
Wow.
then guess what? Steven Spielberg is dyslexic too, and he didn't find out until his 40s. And he said, no wonder it would take me 3 hours to read the script, and everybody else can read it in an hour. Kobe Bryant was dyslexic. Muhammad Ali, Magic Johnson. So I just started highlighting folks who looked like my daughter who were dyslexic, because we don't talk about learning disabilities. And I got funding through Morgan Cares, which is an entity at Morgan State University that partners and puts together research in the community.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I wrote up that grant was that undiagnosed learning disabilities trigger mental health issues. Because what we know is when a kiddo doesn't learn how to read, they start feeling insecure, they lack confidence, they get depressed because they can't access the curriculum like their peers, and they know this. Now, a study out of Texas showed that 80% of inmates were illiterate and 40% had dyslexia.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And in 2018, Donald Trump passed a law, a part of the First Step Act, that all federal prisons must screen and treat dyslexia. And so I say, why is the government waiting until Black and brown folks are incarcerated to screen and treat dyslexia when we're fighting to get our K-12 schools to say what it is, right? To say
Right.
dyslexia.
Right.
So I just really started on this journey to educate, empower, equip, help remove the stigma. Let's talk about it and really get parents to really understand how to advocate, how to successfully advocate, because there are a lot of parents right now. If we say in the chat, whose child has an IEP, are you going to the meetings? And they say, yes, they're pulling it up on their phones for me. And then when I ask the question, what's the primary diagnosis? They can't really tell me.
Yeah,
And then I say to them, you can't successfully advocate for your child if you can't even tell me what the primary
Right.
problem is.
Right. So that is the key. So that's a nugget. You have to know the problem. I found this quote that said, for Black students with dyslexia, their difficulty acquiring reading raises no alarms due to low expectations and excludes them from a dyslexia diagnosis. That's where when we're talking about the racism within the schools, the implicit bias. I don't expect you to raise to a certain level. So if you are having challenges reading, it feeds into my preconceived notion. Is that, what do you think about that quote, Winifred?
That is absolutely correct. That's why my podcast is so intentional, Black and Dyslexic, right? I am very intentional with my pro-Blackness and calling it out, because that organization I was a part of, Decoding Dyslexia, oftentimes I was the only Black person. I went to Portland, Oregon for their International Dyslexia Conference, and I've been to many, many conferences, and I've never been to one so white. And this learning disability does not discriminate. It does not discriminate, but it is often referred to as a white, wealthy learning disability because they get the diagnosis. The private dyslexia schools are predominantly white. And then there are also the stereotypes that we don't read to our children. And that goes for all parents, but specifically for Black and underrepresented minorities. Oh, you don't have time. You're working multiple jobs. You're not pouring into your child. And that's simply not true.
Not true.
So we are definitely overdiagnosed with the wrong thing, and then underdiagnosed with what is going on. So the parent that I spoke with that didn't want the identification, right? I said, look here, they're going to label your child regardless. You don't want this label. They're going to label your child defiant. They're going to label them disruptive, right? They may label them emotionally disturbed, right? So those are the wrong labels. That's the wrong identification. Let's go ahead with the correct one and get them the help that they need.
That they needed.
But that quote is spot on. It is the number one civil rights issue of our time right now, literacy and reading. And it is definitely impacting the Black and brown community and underserved minorities the most.
The most, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And so, Taryn, I don't want to leave you out of this conversation, but this is one that really impacts African American families and students at a disproportionate, in a disproportionate way, as so many things do. Yeah. Within the education.
I had the privilege. I had the white, wealthy privilege of being diagnosed. I'm a millennial, so I was diagnosed with ADHD actually when I was 11. But a little bit like Winifred, I didn't. I mean, first of all, I was 11, but second of all, ADD and ADHD when I was 11 in 1997 was still fairly new-ish. Like it not many people knew all these things about it like they do now, and I certainly didn't understand it, and neither did my mother, and I thought it meant I was stupid. So I refused the diagnosis. No, I'm not that. I refused to take medication for it. This isn't it. I'm not doing that. And it wasn't until my daughter exhibited the same symptoms that I, or the same behaviors that I, and I took her to a doctor and said, hey, what's going on? And they said ADHD. And I said, oh, crap. That's a hereditary one. So that's on me too. So, yeah.
But that is so common. That is so common, Taryn. And when you are the adult, right, and you didn't get the, help with executive function that would have, helped you along the way. You didn't go ahead and get extra time. And then you reflect on it and say, dang, that's why I never did well on tests, right? And you understand that your working memory is not all intact, right? And now you see your child do or say something, you're like, oh my gosh, that's me. Oh, that's how it showed up for me. And it's like almost a mirror image when you see it in your child. But, ADHD, dyslexia, for the Black and brown culture, historically, Black folks could not show weakness. Enslaved folks could not show that something was wrong, right? We have a culture of what goes on in this house stays in this house, right? We're not going to talk about what's wrong. We're not going to go seek out help because we're stressed out, or find out why we have anxiety, because every time you tell me to read out loud, my daughter was shaking. In kindergarten, her teacher told her, she said, Mom, I know you're real hard on her and you're real strong on academics, but when it's time for her to read, she's shaking, right? I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's me. But I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know she was dyslexic, right? So I had to give myself grace, because I was very hard. Being a Generation X, and we talked about that before we went live, and whatever, a latchkey kid, my mom didn't really pour into me. It's amazing that I made A's and B's because she worked all the time. So I was going to be present, and I was going to be on top of my daughter, because I'm going to maximize your potential. So I was hard, but not knowing that she was giving her best. She was trying. Now, she had to be removed from the reading group in kindergarten, but she still graduated valedictorian. but
Well, good for
but
her. Good
but
for
I didn't know.
right. But you didn't know, Mom, but you were proactive. So, Mom,
Yes.
we are, we got a few more minutes. I really want, as a parent, right? And parents here, parents may be watching. And so welcome to the Chicken Box. If you're watching, Jewel, we see you. Thank you for tuning in. So parents really want to know, I'm sure, let's say it's gone undiagnosed for a long time. And let's say this young person is now where you are teaching. Let's say can a young person make it all the way to high school and not have a diagnosis?
Absolutely. They make it to
Right.
college.
They make it to
They
college.
make it to
Right?
college.
They make it all the way.
A lot of folks, especially if they're smart, right? Because you develop coping strategies to make it through. And now with assistive technology, right? You can
Yep.
use assistive technology to read for you. So for my ADHD, and most often, ADHD and dyslexia or a learning disability will come to fruition in college because the work demand and the executive function, the time management, the prioritizing, it's rearing its ugly head and you can't manage it all. So one time in undergrad, a teacher almost was onto it because he couldn't understand why I couldn't pass any of his tests. I was his favorite star student. I sat in the front. I did all the assignments. I knew all the answers. I answered everything correctly. But when it came time to take that test, I bombed. And he was just like, something is going on. And I'm like, I don't know. But in college, a lot of folks get diagnosed, right? Because that work demand, you got papers, there's a lot of reading. Can you imagine someone with dyslexia, never got any interventions, and now there's all this reading? And then with ADHD, ADHD impacts the processing speed. And what that means, it takes more time to grasp a concept. So it's very fast paced in college. That professor is not waiting on you and you need information chunked. And my daughter was in elementary, first grade, and she used to always say, Mommy, make it fun and break it up for me. I didn't know what that meant. Taryn, isn't that huge? Like she knew, break it up for me, Mommy. Don't give me 8 steps. Give me 4.
Wow.
And then give me the other 4. Right? She was a little rock star because we didn't know. We didn't know. But if you don't know, and then how it gets harder as you get older, because you're not taught to self-advocate, right? With me and my ADHD, I'm still learning how does that show up at work for me? Because it shows up, it doesn't go away. So with me not knowing all these years, I have to really assess how does it show up at work for me? Now, let me tell you how I've never had a job for 5 years, right? You saw my bio. I've worked and done a lot. When the thrill is gone, so am I. Because my ADHD brain needs to be stimulated. Jobs that I did well in were sales jobs and working with people, building relationships, networking. There was a goal with the sales job, but in sales, they don't care how you get to it.
Nope.
And how I get to it is my ADHD. This day I want to work on this. This day I want to work on this. But at the end of the time period, I've got it done. A newly created position. Winifred, we've got this new position. We want to, in higher education, when I started in 2008, there was a big push for employer development, right? Because we got to show this return on investment. Remember in 2010, the market crashed. People, why should I go to college? How am I get a job? We've got this newly created position. Winifred built relationships with folks to get people internships. And I'm like, okay, let's use their work study money, right? So newly created positions where I can be creative and just do it the way that I want to do it. So I'm still learning how to advocate, right? So think about it. How do you advocate in college when you have to go to the professor? There's no IEP. Your mom can't talk to them for you, right? Then when you get into the workplace, anybody just look at that when you're filling out an application, click here if you need accommodations. You know how many people don't click there?
Right.
They might need a human reader. They might need more time, right? But they don't click. So you have to know how that learning disability or that ADHD impacts you so that you can successfully advocate for yourself, that self-advocacy. So this is why a lot of folks who are neurodivergent are underemployed. They're scared to take that next step. They're scared to take that certification or that exam. And so they're underemployed because they lack confidence and self-esteem that, yeah, I can do that job, right? I can access this information. I just need a little more support. So, yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. And so, listen, for those who are watching by Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube, we've been having a fascinating discussion. It's fascinating from my perspective. Thank you so much to Winifred Winston about neuro, I can't even say it right now, but dyslexia and ADHD. See, I might be a little ADHD myself and to keep the train of thought going. We've been talking about how to advocate for your child, how to identify certain learning disabilities early enough, and how to really move the needle. And also, Winfred, I don't know if you realize, you probably do realize, you've normalized it some too, to say to us that, you know what, this is something that people experience. It's not something to sweep under the rug. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's something to like get help for. And you're right. A lot of times we see or hear that there's something wrong, and we say, okay, it's flawed. Taryn says she has experience with it as well. How many people are impacted? Winfred, do you know what is
with dyslexia? The stats tell us 1 in 5.
1 in 5. So that's 20% of the
population struggles with some type of form of dyslexia, and it's on a spectrum. There's mild, moderate, and severe.
Okay.
Right. And so it shows up differently for different folks. And same thing with ADHD. Some folks really struggle with executive function, time management, prioritizing tasks, and really, folks who switch jobs a lot, like myself. But then there are some who really struggle to maintain a quality of life because that ADHD and or that dyslexia is getting in the way.
Okay. All right. Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Well, we're at almost at the final 10 minutes of the box. And so it's time to get on the box. So here's the way the box works. First of all, let me say thank you to those of you who tuned in either during our live broadcast or you tuned in during the rebroadcast. You watched that a little bit later. We thank you for being here. We're glad that we're having this discussion today. Wow, Winfred and Taryn, how interesting this has been. I have a child who was diagnosed with ADHD as well, diagnosed early, but not helped early.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So sometimes you get the diagnosis and you hear things like, oh, he's a boy, he'll grow out of it. Boys are just active, they're just this, they're just that. But that's an IEP, like you said, that doesn't help. Accommodation, sitting up front, more time on the test. Even for ADHD, I know dyslexia, they do that, but that's an accommodation for ADHD as well. A person who's struggling with ADHD, that's not a coping strategy. That is a frustration strategy because they just have more time to not be focused on what they're trying to finish, and it's more frustrating. So we've been having this discussion. I'm kind of on the box now, and so I'm going to ask Winifred and Taryn. So here's what happens on the box. When you get on the box, you have a couple of minutes to say whatever's on your mind. You can talk about what we've been talking about. You can veer off into a subset of that. It could be your opinion, unfiltered. You can say whatever it is that you would like to say, because why? You're on the box. So we say, don't be a chicken, get on the box. And so I'm on the box now. I'm going to get on the box, get off the box. The only thing I want to say before I get off the box, switching topics just a little bit. Here at the Afro, we republished our 1945 book, This Is Our War. This is our war in honor of Veterans Day and the integration of the armed forces. If you want to know what it was like in 1945, we had 7 war correspondents, the largest number of war correspondents of any Black newspaper in the world, in the country. And it's important today, with all the, we have so many conflicts going on. But we also highlight the 688th, which was an all-female Black battalion that served in World War II. So some people want to know, what was it like for Black people in World War II? It's not like you read it in the history books. So if you are interested, I think it's, I don't know. Well, if this is not the right price, this is your price. It's $30, which includes your tax, your shipping, and your handling. And we have a limited edition in this first run. People have asked, will it be on Amazon? It will eventually be there, but we did a limited edition just for Veterans Day. Also, please go to afro.com. Follow us on social. We're on all the platforms at Afro News, except for Meta, Facebook, which we've been on for since its inception, and I think that says Afro American Newspapers. But if you do Afro News, you'll still find us on that. So I am off the box. Taryn, I'm gonna ask Winfred to have the last word, and so you're on the box.
All right. So I want to leave
But
parents with,
hold it, Winfred. You're
We
gonna
want
get
you to have the last
you
word.
got the last word.
We want you to go last because
Okay.
So Taryn's on the box now, and you absolutely get the last word.
okay.
So I want to actually bring up one of my favorite quotes, and I brought it up here. So let me take a look. It is from Albert Einstein, and it says, "Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid." And it really encompasses, what we're talking about today: dyslexia and ADHD, any type of neurodivergence. Whether most neurodivergence is on a spectrum. So you've got your dyslexia, your ADHD, your autism, bipolar disorder. Lots of things are considered neurodivergence, and it makes sense if you look back in our history as human beings. We lived as hunter-gatherers for a long time, and imagine the things that we needed to notice. ADHD is a superpower. It can be. Imagine the things that, if you're hunting, you need to be able to see a squirrel, and there it is. There's all these wonderful things that can come from autism, ADHD, dyslexia, these incredible human beings, if they're just taught correctly, if they are brought up and shown love, not treated like they're stupid, not punished for learning differently, not having these labels like disruptive and having bad attitude and all these things. All of it has to do with the neurodivergence. So I just want to end my time. I'm going to go ahead and say thank you so much, Winifred, for I the show. I will say what Impeccable always says: please call a senior today. Don't text them, call them. Show the love to our older generation. They really need our support all throughout the year, but especially as we're coming up into the holiday season. Just give them a call. Somebody that that's older, spend a little time on the phone with them. Thanks, everybody. Winnie, you're on the box. Oh, sorry, Winifred.
Please.
My niece's name is Winnie, short for Winifred. So,
and Impeccable's not here before when Winifred drums on. Don't call me. Text me.
Please. You can text Dr. Draper.
All right, Winifred, you're on the box.
Okay. So I want to just define neurodiversity and neurodivergent. We've been saying that term a lot, and all that simply means is a brain that works and processes information differently than the societal norm, right? That's what neurodivergent means. That means that your brain works differently. So I just wanted to put that out there because that is a newer term that we use: neurodivergent, neurodiversity. You hear that a lot, and all that means is a brain that works differently. But I want to just speak to parents and say, please educate yourself. You can find us on the web at So All Can Read. I want you to also visit a website called understood.org. And if you are in Baltimore City, please reach out to Partners for Success. Michelle Grant Thornton is amazing, and it is a resource center for parents whose children receive special education services. It is called Partners for Success. Their office is actually on Northern Parkway. Every school district in the state of Maryland has a Partners for Success office. You can go there and check out books, resources, anything you want in regards to special education. I use that as a hub to get books that I did not want to purchase or could not purchase at the time. It was there at Partners for Success. Educate yourself. Learn what the learning disability is. Okay, understand what dyslexia is, what it is not. If it's ADHD, learn what it is not, and how it operates for your child. Educate yourself on what it is and how to advocate for your child. So you've got to learn that IEP process. My daughter and I created a dyslexia word search puzzle book. It is available on Amazon. It is designed to educate parents, teachers, the masses in a fun and engaging way. Okay, but education is key. Educate, empower, and equip. reach out to me directly. Tell me, hey, I heard you on Afro. You were doing the chicken box. I am very accessible. And it'll take me a couple of days to get to you, but I will respond. But please educate yourself. Let's help remove this stigma so all can read.
Amen. All right. What's the best way to reach you?
At So All Can Read. You can visit me on the web on all social media platforms at So All Can Read.
At So All Can Read. Let me say as we close, what you're doing is so important. When my kids came along, you didn't even get an IEP. You got this is not working out and we're thinking about holding them back or whatever it is. So what you're doing is so important, so key. I just want to thank you for that, for you and your network of professionals, because our young people are brilliant. I say that all the time. And so given equal opportunity and access and tools,
absolutely,
and the tools that we need, and the correct diagnosis, and not shying away from a diagnosis. That's what I heard. I heard you say that loud and clear. Embrace
absolutely.
It, accept it, get help for it, and be glad that you can have that help. Winifred, your podcast is available. You didn't say a lot about it, but I know.
Oh, yes, it's available on all your listening platforms. Spotify, we're on YouTube, we're on Apple, we're on Google Play. Black and Dyslexic. Absolutely.
Black and Dyslexic is the name of her podcast. So let's tune into her podcast. Let's support the work. And I'm sure that on Giving Tuesday, you're also looking for some support, right?
Absolutely. You can go to our website and donate, www.soallcanread.org, because what we do is help parents offset the cost of quality, affordable remediation. Nobody else is doing that. Nobody is going to pay your stipend to connect with an advocate. Nobody is going to pay 3 months of your tutoring for you. But I realized that, we were not low income or very wealthy. We were in the middle and it was no help for us. And we do not discriminate on income. If we have the means, we are going to help you. We partner with other organizations to help educate you about this. So definitely, please go to our website. We could not do this work. We want to be able to put a dyslexia puzzle book at every resource center, right? A fun and engaging way to learn about dyslexia, about remediation, interventions, so you can do the research.
Thank you so much. So we will not be on the box next week. Next week is Thanksgiving. A blessed and happy Thanksgiving to everyone. The Bible says in everything, give thanks. And so today we're giving thanks for Winifred Winston and for the knowledge that she brings to a topic that impacts so many of us. Thank you. And goodbye, everybody. See you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being on the show, Winifred.
Thanks for having me.